great to be here. I remember coming through the doors this morning when I first got here and thinking, my God, it's been over half of my life since I've wandered the halls of a high school. I remember in grade 8, one of my classmates, her speech for our public speaking class that year was about going into high school and all the fears that she had about the changes that were coming in her life, because it was a huge transition. I remember a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I remember that I don't want to remember, and then there's a lot of things that I don't remember because I'm not a strong enough person to deal with what those memories are. I remember what it feels like to be unloved and unwanted. Many, many years ago, 47 actually, I was born into a family where my mother was dying of cancer and my father was an abusive alcoholic who was dealing with his own demons through drinking. I was born in Calgary, which was kind of weird because my 2 older sisters and my younger sister were all born in Kitchener. And I'm not really sure why we were in Calgary at the time I was born. My half-brother from my father's first marriage says my dad was running from the law, which, considering the type of person he was, could be very true, but again, I don't know that for certain. My earliest childhood memory is lying in my bed one night. It was a summer night, and cars were going by on the street, and headlights were causing the branches to have really funky, cool patterns on the ceiling of my bedroom. And I remember lying in bed thinking, you know, it would be so great if I could just jump on one of those beams and go somewhere where the world was a good place. And I fantasized that I was actually traveling on one of those beams and going someplace where I wanted to be and where I was wanted to be. And it was a happy thought. I could escape. I was under 5. How many 5-year-olds should be faced with that sort of thought process? It's totally wrong. But I was in a happy place because I had escaped, at least in my mind. And then my happiness was shattered by the slamming of the car door, which meant that my father was home, and that he would be coming up to my bedroom to talk to me, yell at me, scream at me, possibly beat me into the man that I was supposed to be. And I knew that I was faced with one of the decisions that I would be faced with every night that he came home. And that was, should I pretend that I'm asleep, or should I be awake? Because if I was awake, I was a horrible, rotten child who didn't miss the bedtime, and I should have been in bed, and I should have been asleep, so therefore I deserved beating because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. But if I was sleeping, I was an ungrateful child who couldn't stay up long enough to wish his father good night. So it was a lose-lose situation, whatever I did. But that night I chose to be sleeping because I just didn't want to have to deal with him. And of course I stumbled up the stairs and stumbled into my room, and I could smell the alcohol of his breath as he's leaning over me and I'm pretending to sleep. And of course he yells and swears at me because I'm the ungrateful son who wouldn't stay awake long enough to see his father. And the story he told me that night was that I had better be careful because there was this person on the loose in the city named Kitchener-Waterloo Strangler who was crawling into the bedrooms of young boys at night and killing them because they were rotten, evil children like I was. And after he told me that, he went and he opened my bedroom window, left my room, turned off the light on his way out, closed my door and locked the door. And I remember lying in my bed for what seemed like ages, being a young child. It was probably only 30 seconds or so, but I remember being too terrified to even move. I didn't want to budge. But the fear wasn't that the strangler was going to be coming in my room killing me. The fear was actually that my father would be coming back into my room and bathing the man into me that I was supposed to become. But eventually I got the courage up to move, and I crawled over to my bedroom window and I looked out into the street. And standing under the streetlight was a person having a cigarette, a male. So I naturally figured out that this was the Kitchener-Waterloo Strangler. So rather than running back to bed in fear, I started jumping up and down and waving. Well, I'm over here, come get me, come get me. So even as a young child of under 5, I was aware that getting killed was better than living the life that I was living. Looking back now, I realize that nobody should ever have to make those decisions or even think that sort of thought process, especially somebody who's just a child learning to live. When I was 6 years old, I got run over by a car, and my knee bolt was broken in 6 places, and I was in the hospital traction for about 6 months. And that was a good thing, because I was away from the anger, the pain, and the abuse that I was faced with every day at home. And I was in a hospital where at least there were nurses who would care for me, even if they were only caring for me because that's what they were paid to do. I remember a few things in the hospital. I remember my first introduction to spinach, which for me was a fantastic thing. There was this green blobby thing on the plate, but I loved the taste of it, and most of the people sharing my room didn't like theirs, so I was like, oh, I want that, I want that. And the nurses were really happy that this young kid with a broken leg was eating spinach because it was a good thing. I remember the nurses having to teach me how to walk again once the cast was taken off my leg because I had lost the ability to walk. But my most vivid memory of being in the hospital is one night lying in my bed and either awaking to a vision or having a dream, I don't know which, where there was this lioness lying on the foot of my bed. And I wasn't afraid. I felt a strange peace. And she spoke to me and said, I'm sorry I have to go, but you're strong, you can carry on, don't give up. And then she was gone. And I started screaming and hollering, and the nurses came running down the hallway. What is it, what is it, what is it? And I told them that my mother had just died. And they said, oh no, you just had a bad dream. The next morning when visiting hours came, and I could hear the usual footsteps coming down the hallway. And usually I could hear two separate sets of footsteps, but that morning I only heard one. And my father appeared at the door of the hospital room, looked at me and said, your mother just died last night. You can cry for 5 minutes, but then you can never cry again, because real men don't cry. After when I got better and I was released from the hospital, I didn't go back to my father because he was an alcoholic and wasn't capable of taking care of children. So my two older sisters and I were adopted by a farm family, and my younger sister was adopted by a family in Toronto. So, I'm thinking, okay, I've moved from this horrendous situation, life is going to be good now. But unfortunately, life did not get much better. I apparently was a horrible, rotten child, which is why nobody wanted me, and I was in trouble all the time. Every day at school, I would start getting anxiety and panic attacks because I knew that when I got home, I was going to get a beating or a whipping for some crime, whether real or imagined. But I knew that I was just this rotten child, and I knew that I was going to be in trouble because it was a daily occurrence. Definitely did not feel wanted or loved or cared about, and the abuse continued. But I did have something to help me get through my days, and that was my one older sister. We were just a year apart in age. And when things got too rough, we would go to our little hiding spot on the farm, and we would sit and talk about how things were going to be in the future, how we were going to escape and move forward and actually have a good life. And we shared each other's pain and misery, and heard each other's stories and cried with each other, and helped each other continue surviving for yet another day. Eventually, life on the farm became too much for my sister, and she ran away. We were very young, the police were very smart, but she didn't run very far. And she got picked up by the police, and she got put in foster care. Because I knew that she was running away, and I didn't tell anybody, I was deemed not worthy to live with the adopted family on the farm anymore either. So they decided to put me in foster care for a 6-month trial probation to see if they could fix all the problems that were wrong with me. Foster care wasn't as horrible. There wasn't the physical abuse, but there was mental and emotional abuse as well. But that was only for 6 months trial basis. And after the 6 months, we went back to the courthouse to see whether or not I would remain in care or if I had been fixed and I was a good enough person to live on the farm again. I didn't get to go into the hearings or anything because it was only about my life and all about me and how I felt, and what I thought didn't matter because I was just a child, a piece of property to be passed around from one person to another. And I remember leaving with my foster mother and my foster brother again, without seeing the farm family. I didn't have a chance to look at them or say hi or bye or anything to them. And the reason soon became clear to me because on the way home my foster mother said that they didn't even bother to show up, which to me meant I'm definitely unlovable, unworthy, unwanted, and nobody cares about me. So I continued to live in foster care. I became a parent board with Family and Children's Services. But trouble seemed to follow me wherever I went. And there was a rather large incident in the foster home that I was at, which resulted in my foster father saying, "Get out of here, I never want to see your face again." So I left, and I went to the only safe place I knew, which was my sister's place. And From there, I contacted my worker for Family and Children's Services, and they tried placing me several other places, but nothing ever seemed to work out because I was just this horrible, evil, rotten person who nobody wanted, nobody cared about, and nobody loved. But because I was crown board, they couldn't just kick me out. As long as I was still in school, they had to help take care of me. So they gave me money each month and said, live. As long as you're still in school, we have to provide for you. And I'm pretty sure it was $325 a month they gave me, but my figures could be wrong. It was a long time ago. But even back then, that wasn't enough to survive on. I was very fortunate. My sister's landlord rented me an apartment for half the price that they would charge anybody else. But it still wasn't enough to live. So I ended up working full-time at a donut shop, midnight shift, and going to high school during the day. And I managed to go through high school and ended up going to college and studying journalism. Worked as a journalist for a while and realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. But I managed to do that and continue moving forward with my life and my journey. But every day was a struggle to survive, and I really had no direction, no idea how to live. My entire life had been waking up every morning and figuring out a way to make it through the day so that I could get up the next morning and continue with my struggles. When I was 23, one of the worst possible things that could have happened to me happened, and my sister was killed in an accident, and I lost my only support system that I had in this world. And I had a huge emotional breakdown and wanted to die myself. I would pray to God, take me, bring her back. She has kids. She has a purpose on this planet. I don't. Please take me. I literally stopped eating and would have to crawl to the bathroom whenever I had to go to the bathroom because I didn't have the energy to do anything else but. Eventually, several of the angels that were put into my life came along and helped to motivate me to get out of my depression and move forward with my journey. But again, not believing in myself and not having any life skills whatsoever, I just continued working at survivor jobs, minimum wage, barely paying the bills. And eventually, wages didn't go up, expenses didn't go up, and I found myself faced with the realization that I can't afford to live in an apartment. And I ended up living on the streets, struggling each day to survive, but I was still alive. And I continued to work, even though I was homeless. I still worked survivor jobs, but unfortunately, minimum wage is not enough to cover expenses. But I was on the streets, and I was in Kitchener. And one day I decided, maybe if I move to a bigger city, there'll be more opportunities, and I'll actually get my life together and become a productive part of the society. So I moved to Hamilton to try to start all over again. Continued to fail at everything I tried. So I thought, maybe if I move to a bigger city, there'll be more opportunities and I'll become a productive part of the community. So I moved to Toronto. And what a surprise, I continued to be a failure. Like everybody had told me all my life, that I would never amount to anything, and I was living up to their expectations. And I spent my entire life struggling not to be a failure, to prove people wrong that I wasn't a failure. But I never once said I even thought about becoming a success. And what you put out into the universe is what the universe is going to put back to you. So the only thing I put out there was not being a failure. So failure is what I was getting back. One morning I woke up and I realized that it doesn't matter where I go, I'm going to continue being this failure that everyone had told me all my life that I was going to be. And I accepted the fact that they were right. So I decided that I was going to hitchhike back across the country to Calgary, where I had been born, just to see what the city looked like before I died, because that was where I was going to kill myself. But the universe has strange plans, put out your plans, and sometimes the universe laughs back at you and says that's not what I have in mind. So while I was living on the streets in Toronto, I started recognizing that there's all these other people living on the streets with me who are being treated horrendously by members of the community. They're being treated like third-class citizens, they're marginalized, and they definitely are not getting the respect and dignity that they deserve. So I started fighting on behalf of the people who were living on the streets with me, advocating for them, getting them the respect and dignity that everybody on this planet deserves. And I did that for an extended period of time. I helped people move forward with their journeys because they were worthy of having this help. And I was so offended that the community could not see that these were people. They weren't homeless people, they were people who just happened to be homeless. And because they just happen to be homeless, they did not deserve to be treated worse than anybody else. You know, there's this saying that you kick people when they're down, and that's what society does so much. Anybody who's different, anybody who has anything different than the norm, you know, society still continues to kick them all down. But that's where you guys come in. You know, you guys are the future of our planet, and you guys have the ability to help them up when you see them down, rather than continue to kick them. So I continued fighting for these people, but not fighting for myself, because I still didn't see myself worthy. Until eventually, again, angels that were put into my life helped me recognize that I'm a person too. I'm not a failure. I'm a person who had difficult situations to face and difficult situations to overcome, and that I was actually a strong person because I managed to get through all of the things that I had gotten through in my life. And these angels helped to pick me up and give me a hand up and help me recognize that I can do things in this community. And eventually, I was looking through the help wanted ads, and I found a job where one of the criteria was to have been a survivor of the mental health system. And I thought this was totally cool, because finding my craziness was an asset, an actual requirement to get a job, rather than something that was going to keep me from getting a job. So I ended up getting the job, which was really cool. And I worked for an organization in Toronto where every single person, from the executive director down to the cleaner, had survived the mental health system. And it was such an empowering experience, recognizing that just because you're different, or your mind works different, or you look different, or you're a different color, you know, doesn't mean that you're not capable and you're not able of doing things. And working in an environment where you're supported rather than looked down on or criticized or condemned was one of the most empowering experiences I had in my life. And it helped me to start putting my feet forward and moving forward with my journey. And I've gotten to a point now where, because of all the crap that I went through in my life, I'm able to help people who have gone through similar circumstances. It gives me a better understanding of how horrendous life can be and how horrible some people's journeys are. And it gives me the realization that I am in no place to look down on anybody or judge anybody or criticize or condemn anybody because they do something different than me. And that's what you guys can do as well. Now, I'm so pleased to see a large group, like this entire room filled with young minds who are capable of changing the future. And by changing the future, I mean changing the way you think about the little things. When you see somebody downtown begging for change, don't scorn them. Don't give them money if you don't want to, but recognize that they're human and acknowledge them at least. I've talked to many people who live on the streets who the greatest thing that people have given them is the acknowledgement that they are a person. You know, they're not homeless. They are a person who is homeless. They're not the label that has been put on them. And I implore each and every one of you today, when you leave here and you go forward with your journeys, that the people that you meet who might be a little bit different than you, come from a different country, speak a different language, different sexual orientation, no matter what the difference is, recognize that you're not different at all. You're all humans. And that is the most important thing, is to recognize that we're all humans first, we're all people first, and we all deserve the equal respect and dignity that everybody on this planet should have. So rather than condemn or judge or scorn, meet people who are different from you with compassion. You don't know the journey that they've taken. One of the privileges that I have because of the journey that I've had is I get to come and I get to speak with people like you to help open your eyes to recognize that people's circumstances may be different, but you never understand what their life was all about and what brought them to the point that they are in their life. So rather than judging or looking down, you know, look at them and give them a hand up. I implore each and every one of you when you leave here today to do some introspection of yourselves. I don't even know if that's a word, but look inside of yourselves and see how you can make a difference in somebody else's life. Thank you so much for listening to me.